Our first item of business is to discuss superintendent board evaluations with OSBA Director of Board Development, Kristen Miles. Is she with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. We have invited Kristen Miles from OSBA to our meeting this evening to discuss the superintendent's evaluation process and how OSBA can potentially support our board. Kristen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Miles. I'm the Director of Board Development at OSBA. Happy to be here with you. I'm just going to go ahead and if you are ready for me to start, I can go ahead and go over our process and what we would present to you. You ready for me to dive in?
Go ahead.
Okay. So you've got your superintendent evaluation process for the year, and I've got a number of dates in front of me that are put together as a draft. And what I'm going to do is walk through the process that we would present to consult on. You already use our tool, the OSBA tool for superintendent evaluation. And so I'm going to present my recommendations and what we would do. So as part of this process, we recommend a mid-year goal reflection, and you would start with that. So your superintendent makes goals, you make those collaboratively, and then prior to the end of year summative evaluation, we recommend a mid-year goal review and a mid-year review based on the standards that you adopt and the tool that you adopt. And so that can be a facilitated discussion or a discussion in executive session, as long as you are sticking to the provision of executive session that allows you to go into an evaluative discussion, just as you would at the end of the year. And so the first step in the process would be to have that discussion with your superintendent about progress on standards, progress on goals. And that's really a great foundational piece that provides both accountability and support. And that lets the board know and the superintendent know how things are progressing, if there's more support needed, if there's course correction needed, and just provide some guidance along the way. Near the end of the process, I would provide some, this is the pitch, I would provide some training to the board in how each individual board member would then go about filling out their own tool to come to the board meeting where you would go over your full evaluation. So each board member would then go about filling in their own tool, their own ratings, and their own comments for their evaluation. The goal of then the full summative evaluation meeting is for everyone to come in together to that executive session and to have the facilitated discussion where everybody can participate because you've got a facilitator. So in our process, we act as the facilitator and start taking down themes. So everybody is discussing, we take down the themes that you're discussing. So we don't collect and compile comments in advance. What we find is really most helpful and gets to the point faster is to get to that one voice evaluation where you are discussing and we are acting as your scribe and really pulling out 2-3 big themes that you're discussing, because we don't want to give your superintendent a big book at the end of this. For each standard, we want to pull out really truly what you're saying, what your messages are. And so as the meeting goes along, we're doing that. We're creating that document, that draft document for you. And then at the end of each standard discussion, we're saying, okay, everybody came with a score. Now hearing that discussion, now what should the score be? So we don't get caught up in the score in the beginning, but we come to consensus then on what that score is for each of those standards. And we go through each of those standards in turn. We do a similar thing with the goals. For the self-evaluation part of it, and this can be done both at the mid-year checkpoint and at the end of the year, in our tool, there are a number of pieces of evidence that the superintendent can provide. As you know, we don't recommend being involved in the daily business of the superintendent, nor are you, nor do you want to be. But there are ways in which it's hard to evaluate the superintendent's performance because you're not seeing everything that he does all day long. And so we have a list in each standard of what are the kinds of things that might be presented to you that show you that each standard is being met. And that is neither a comprehensive list nor a list that everything would need to be checked off, but it gives both you and your superintendent a good idea of the kinds of things that may be presented to you. And what we typically recommend is that not only does he give himself a rating on each standard, but then present some of those things to the board in a portfolio as a way of self-evaluating. The board takes that information into consideration prior to coming to that summative evaluation meeting. And then my understanding is that after that compilation, so then I would give that to you, and then you would then meet, you would give that to your superintendent to discuss, to ask questions, to make any revisions to, and then adopt that eventually at a future meeting. And so that is typically how we facilitate that process. Happy to take questions or fill in any blanks there.
Thank you, Kristen. As a reminder, this is, we're doing this because Greg McKenzie is fully retired and we don't have a consultant. Just wanted to remind you guys of that. And now, does anybody have any questions for Kristen regarding her process or experiences that she's had in the past? Before I have a question. Do you have a question, Mark?
I do. We had discussed how the different costs compared to McKenzie last year. As we come to, do we know that now?
Kristen gave me a quote of the prices, and I would say that you are going to be pleasantly surprised at the prices.
Okay. Thanks.
And I can give that information to you in a board update.
Sure.
But I can assure you that you'll be very pleasantly surprised.
For what it's worth, we, in our agenda planning, Yvette and I discussed this with Kristen and Rose and Travis earlier, and we both liked enough of what we heard that we asked Kristen to come to the board meeting, knowing that, yes, we do need a new consultant. If we still want to have a consultant run it, which I think the things we decided last year make sense still, to have a consultant run it instead of trying to have an employee balance the line between seeing all the board feedback and trying to keep their confidentiality and whatever. So if we're going to have a consultant, just it felt like a baked enough idea to bring to y'all. Sorry, if I overheaded your thunder.
No, you're fine. Do you have any questions, Erica?
Mine's not really a question. I think it's more of it could be a question. I don't know. I'll just say it. So I'm curious as to how different districts have liked not having everyone's commentary in kind of that full raw data, raw report, and then being able to pull from that to come to, I guess, a rating that we would speak on as a board. And then I know in the past we've done where the board chair and the vice chair would kind of pull those comments that each individual board member wrote during their evaluation into kind of that final version that we would then submit to the superintendent. And I think that, I guess because I haven't done it any other way, I see incredible value in being able to provide that individual board member commentary, as opposed to not having that and only writing in the evaluation what we as a board has, kind of has voiced as a whole. I would imagine that the superintendent and Travis, feel free to disagree, but I would think that an individual would find tremendous value in reading some of that raw data in the entirety of the report as opposed to just kind of that one final paper. So curious as to how other boards have felt about that in the past, or would be curious what my other board colleagues think about that, because I feel like that's probably the biggest difference with what Kristen is presenting and what we've done in the past is we wouldn't fill out kind of that huge commentary. We would just come with a score for each of those goals, and then only decide what goes into the commentary as a board, if I'm understanding that correctly, Kristen.
So part of what we really emphasize is the one voice evaluation to the superintendent. And that's not to say that different viewpoints can't be acknowledged or reflected. For instance, if you've got in standard 1, which is visionary district leadership, if you've got a couple of dissenting viewpoints, those can both be reflected, right? Like there may be some indicators on the standard that are really positive that you want to reflect, and maybe an area that would be a goal area that can also be reflected. The part that we want to get to is that the superintendent has a collective of folks that give him that final message. And so while everyone comes with their individual comments to share, we do get to that focused one voice evaluation that's got those big themes involved instead of providing a number of individual comments. In my experience, this goes really well. And I will say that I do personally 7 to 8 of these a year, and my colleagues on my team probably do about that number. This has not really been a change in practice for us. We used to collect them, individually prior and then try to sum them up and then bring them to the meeting. What we find now is really that collaborative discussion to try and get to those themes has really helped. But I haven't had any boards or superintendents really feel badly about not having those individual comments, because that cohesive message is really what other boards that I worked with find important, and the superintendent as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
I guess just a follow-up to that, who's curating that message? Is it OSBA, or is it the chair and vice chair of the collective message?
So what I do during that meeting is I scribe for you, but it's your message, not mine. So in real time, you're seeing what I'm writing. And at the end of that, you're making sure that what I'm writing down is reflective of what you want. So we're going through that in the meeting. I'm writing down, and when we get to the end of standard 1, I'm projecting on a screen and saying to you, is this what you said? Am I capturing what you wanted me to capture? And you're looking at this saying, yes, no, we need to change that. And then we're moving on. So my job is to make it easier for you and describe for you and to capture your themes, but it is not my message, it is yours.
Thank you, Kristen. I have a question. In your experience of doing this line of work, what's the percentage you see in board participation?
Like full board or committee, or how do you mean?
Full board.
As in the number of boards total that we do in Oregon, or how many board members?
No, just engagement. Just the board members that are participating in this.
7 of 7 or 5 of 5.
Yeah. So on the boards that I've done, all the board members participate. And we try to get to more boards every year. We have boards that do this every year. There's one district that I've worked with for 8 years. They do this every year. But there are many boards that are 5-member, 7-member. We encourage all board members to participate and not do it by committee. I'm not sure if I'm answering any part of your question. I'm trying to answer it in a number of ways. Is that answering your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I also wanted to add that part of that value that I was telling you about that you'll be appreciative of is that when Kristen does that scribing, she's going to spend 2 hours with us, and she's going to spend a lot of time getting exactly what you guys are saying. So it's going to be a very comprehensive report and saying exactly what you guys are. I think that there's a lot of value instead of that, 15 minutes in and out on Zoom, how we had done it in the past years. This is going to be a very comprehensive, taking time to do this evaluation. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Thank you. Yes, Mark?
I don't feel it as, like, the way I understood it was not as different as we've done before. I think we all, like, Travis still gives us a self-reflection, which we've done in the past. We all craft our responses like we've done in the past. I think the difference that I noticed, and I guess I haven't compared this year's timeline to last year or previous years, maybe we have to start a little sooner, because the difference I noticed was we kind of have an extra meeting at which Kristen attends, and instead of just the board chair trying to call all that information, she assists us. And so we still do the individual reflections. We bring them to the meeting and we discuss them. And I do think, even to her point of board participation, even if you didn't have time to fill out the forms, but you're attending the executive session, you probably will have input. So it's like, it feels like an improvement to me. It requires us to do at least one more meeting, maybe two more meetings. But it requires us to do at least one more meeting, but it's where we're all getting together discussing this as a specific topic in executive session. So I don't think we're losing that individual flavor. I guess at some point, if we look at consistency with how we've done things in the past, would we release all those individual reflections to Travis at some point, which we have done in the past, besides the public-facing letter that we read in open session. We've also decided to confidentially release the board input. I guess we can decide to do that or not. So it felt less different to me than you just described it, because I think we've missed some nuance in the discussion or whatever.
Well, I guess what I understood was that when we do our individual evaluation, we would only be providing a score, not necessarily commentary, but it sounds like there is commentary,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen the form, and so.
I think it's almost the same one we.
Great. Okay. Okay.
I think we tried to use the OSBA tool as much as we could last time, just with Greg facilitating. So I think last year we made a transition to a lot of the OSBA components, but because Greg was still willing to help us, we continue to use Greg. I think it's just now we'd be using OSBA services with their components as opposed to an outside. And it looks like it involves at least one more meeting where we all talk about it as opposed to just coming in with some baked notions. We all work to Kristen helps us come to some consensus, I think. That's how I understand it anyway.
If that's the case, I do agree. I think this would provide tremendous value, and even the fact that OSBA would help scribe, that's huge, because I know that a lot of the burden fell on the chair and the vice chair when it came to actually compiling everyone's responses and pulling that together in one report. That was a lot of legwork that I know that that previous board chairs and vice chairs have had to do. And so having that support with OSBA, I think, is really.
That's still gonna have to turn it all into a letter, though. But yeah, It should be easier, I think.
Patrick or Monique, any questions from you?
Yeah, I have one, and perhaps I might have missed this. So once the scribing is done and the letter is drafted, will we still have the usual time to review that draft for any final thoughts, or is it just a one and done?
You'll have time to review it.
Okay.
And that looks a little different too to me in the thing. So that's what I think is sort of the extra. So there's maybe two extra meetings. One where we discuss just amongst ourselves what we want to agree upon together, come to consensus. And it looks like we also have a meeting to discuss it with Travis ahead of time, and then we do the meeting where we read it in open session. So it looks like maybe there's two extra meetings. One where we work together, just us, to come to some consensus, and then another meeting where so the May 13th one, on what page is this? Page 3 in your packet. The May 13th one looks like that's sort of extra-ish, or at least a step that we didn't do last time that I think, in our post-discussions, it felt like that would have been a good thing to have done, was to discuss with Travis ahead of time and then executive session. So I feel like that's a good addition to the process as well.
We like to see that.
Can I answer the question, Monique? I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Kristen.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We like to see that process as well. I don't know if you were saying that that didn't happen last year, but the time for you to not only review it, but to review it and discuss it with the superintendent before it becomes final, because there may be some comments or questions that he has that you can then make any adjustments to it that you want to make. You don't have to make any adjustments, but if there are any adjustments that you want to make before you adopt it and it becomes final, that conversation lets you do that as well.
Any other questions for Kristen?
Thank you, Kristen, for
Nope.
presenting. I appreciate it. I think that we appreciated the process last year, but I thought there were some things where the board could have provided even better leadership to make things smoother, and I think that and more effective. And I think that your proposal and reviewing the timeline that was included in our board packet makes me feel like this process could be very effective. And so I feel good about the mid-year check-in that'll provide guidance so there's no surprises or unexpected material. And I feel good about the having multiple meetings where we know exactly what's going to happen at each meeting, so we have time to give things thought and consideration. So yes, this sounds great to me, and I recommend moving forward with this proposal.
I don't think choosing them is a thing we vote on, but it's sort of like it's a decision that the chair makes. But like head nod, I think I made the decision to stick with Greg based on feedback from everybody. I mean, like sort of one of those head nod ones where we go, yeah, I feel like that's a good idea. So I feel like it's a good idea.
How's everybody else feeling?
I see a thumbs up over there.
Who knows? No. I don't know. But I'm also good moving forward with it. I only have one experience, and I'm open to, a different method and which, compare and see which one works better. But I also do like the aspect of meeting with my fellow board members and having a discussion about our comments and thoughts. And thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions for you. I think we are all good and set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you later.
Okay, our next agenda item is literacy beyond the third grade with Audria.
Yes, not just me. I have my wonderful, amazing colleague, Gina McLean, our Director of Teaching and Learning. This request came out of our retreat. If you can remember, back in August, we kind of reviewed some of our third grade data, and there was a question that came up about, like, beyond third grade, what do we do to support students that might not be yet reading or not proficient in their grade level yet? So that is where this presentation comes from. If we click to the next slide, you all will be able to understand the interventions and supports that we provide to students and staff around literacy, particularly in grades 4 through 6. That's what we focused on. And it really is connected to our strategic plan around success in the early years. Third grade is our benchmark in the strategic plan. But again, we don't stop teaching reading after third grade. We are still all in. So we wanted to just, again, give Gina an opportunity to share some really great things that we do for our 4th through 6th graders in particular. And I'm going to kick it over to her.
All right. So I have presented in the past at a board retreat like last year and then last January around our early literacy scores, mostly K1. So just an overview of what we do for instruction and assessment in K through 2, and then I'll share 3 through 6 as a comparison. So our district is aligned in our scope and sequence of our curriculum, which is Wonders Maravillas. We have a 90-minute literacy block for all grades K through 6. In K through 2, it's focused on specific foundational skills like phonemic awareness, phonics, and then moving into fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, oral language, and writing. We do provide the opportunity to have a supplemental phonics curriculum. That's one of the things that we are doing to have more explicit instruction in the phonemic awareness and the phonics instruction in K1 and 2. And then we use intervention curriculum in our small group time in the literacy block, and then during our WIN time, which is the what I need, so it's the differentiated time to target the skills that students are needing support in. We have required assessments, and these are the ones that I have gone over in the past. In kindergarten and first grade is EasyCVM, and that's focused on letter sounds and segmenting and blending. And that also aligns with the requirement for a dyslexia screener. So they're required to do that 3 times a year. Our phonics survey is aligned to our core curriculum, and that is assessing students on their sequence of understanding the phonics skill development. In first grade, all students are required to take that assessment 3 times a year. In second and third grade, as needed. If they're below grade level, we give them a phonics survey, again, to target specific skills. We also do running records 3 times a year for second grade, and 1 time a year for first grade, and that's in the spring of the school year. And then we also have several in-program assessments that teachers can choose to do as needed. So for our 3rd through 6th literacy instruction, there's a lot of similarities. We have our scope and sequence again that aligns to our curriculum. Our literacy block is 90 minutes, and the focus on foundational skills is a little bit smaller in whole group time. It really goes into the advanced phonics skills and morphology, so that study of words and the meaning that words have when you change like the prefixes and suffixes. And we're really digging more into the fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, oral language, and writing, so similarities to K through 2. And then we provide supplemental and intervention curriculum, again, used in small group time to target different skills that are needed, and in our WIN time. So again, similar to our K through 2. The assessments differ. Our phonics survey, we give to 3rd through 6th grade students who are below grade level, because by the time they've gotten to 3rd grade, the skills should have mastered a majority of them. And so if they're below grade level, that gives us information to inform our instruction to get them to grade level. That's done 3 times a year as needed. Running records are also done 3 times a year to see if they're on grade level or not, or above grade level for their reading. And then that's 3 times a year, and again in program assessment. So what does our literacy block look like? In 3rd through 6th grade, you can see the 90 minutes is broken down to 10 minutes every day of our morphology instruction for all students, because that's grade level instruction. 35 minutes of whole group instruction, and there's a lot of skills listed there. There's foundational skills, vocabulary, comprehension, reading and writing, and then, so the reading writing companion is responding to reading with writing, and then there's writing. We don't do all of those things in 35 minutes. It depends on the lesson for the day. It could be a couple of those skills being taught in that 35 minutes. And then we have 45 minutes of differentiated small group time, where that could be above level, below grade level, on level skill instruction to be able to support the varying needs of the classroom. That's what it looks like in our English language arts block. In our Spanish language arts block, in our dual language schools, in 4th and 6th grade, the language of instruction is Spanish, so you'll see an hour of the lit block taught in Spanish, and 30 minutes of the lit block taught in English, because Spanish is, again, the language of instruction that year. In 3rd and 5th grade, the primary language of instruction is English, so it'd be swapped in the amount of time that they're in. And so they're engaging, again, in foundational skills, that whole group instruction, the differentiated instruction skill groups, both in English and Spanish, and then more foundational skills in English. That's an overview. And those are followed for all of our elementary schools in those specific grade levels. So thanks to our early lit grant that we had last year and this year, we are able to provide some resources and supports and tools in our 3rd through 6th grade classrooms. One of those was our Early Literacy Success Summer School that took place for 3 weeks in July. We targeted students who were finishing 3rd grade as well as students who were finishing 2nd grade, this year's 3rd and 4th graders. Students were selected based on our phonics survey that I just talked about in our assessments. If they were below grade level and they weren't progressing as well as they should have been, we targeted those students to invite to our program to be able to give those explicit instruction in foundational skills for those 3 weeks. We really paid close attention to where their gaps were in order to target those skills. and we were able to target those skills because we kept the class sizes 15 students or less, and that included a classroom teacher, an assistant or two, and some of our scholars and our interns. So we had a lot of adults supporting small groups of students and provided several small groups and one-on-one support in the explicit phonics instruction. Another thing that we do is the interventions provided during small group and win time. So our core curriculum, Wonders Maravillas, provides a lot of support for the supplemental and intervention. And one of those materials are leveled readers. So they come in varying degrees of support. We have books that are for English learners. We have below grade level, on grade level, and beyond grade level. And those skills are scaffolded and targeted based on the scope and sequence and just help to support the instruction that's happening in whole group. And then we have Tier 2 intervention resources. So an example of that is there's a phonics lesson guide. There's specific phonics skills lessons that we can look at their phonics survey and say, oh, they need support with this. Here are lessons that will target those skills in our small group time. And then also during our win time, outside of literacy blocks for approximately 30 minutes, some grade levels are also using the UFly intervention materials that are used in K through 2 to shore up those skills that maybe they had missed and didn't quite get in their K through 2 instruction. And then again, using those Tier 2 intervention materials, because core curriculum is Tier 1 and intervention is Tier 2. Another thing that we have as far as assessment is when we're going from learning to read to reading to learn. So in K through 2, the cognitive load for students is in learning to read and decoding, sounding out words, and a lot of their time is spent mentally thinking about how to do that. And then when you switch over in about 3rd grade, you're switching towards that reading to learn. So the demand should be more on the fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, because there should be automaticity and accuracy already strong and proficient by that grade level. That's not always the case. And so we use other assessments to make our instructional decisions. So we have a plethora of assessments in our curriculum for fluency. You can see there. We have several for comprehension as well as vocabulary, because once they get up into the older grade levels, there are different gaps that students could have, and these help target that to inform our instruction in the small group and the win time. We are also able to provide professional development and training to 3rd through 6th grade teachers. And again, thanks to our Early Literacy Success Grant, we were able last year and this year to provide grade level collaborations, where it's either a half day or a full day that we pull our grade level teachers together. So like all 3rd grade teachers will be pulled and be able to get receive instruction and professional development around these specific areas of literacy. So like our science of reading, that I presented before here to the board, foundational skills, fluency, data analysis for our small group instruction, and this year we have a heavy emphasis on writing and understanding the simple view of writing and how that aligns to the instruction that we're providing for our students, and then calibrating our scoring based on grade level standards. Because I might be at my school only seeing the writing that my students are producing, but what is, Audrey at another school, what are her students producing, and making sure that we are calibrating based on standards, not on what we think students should be able to. A lot of time on that this year.
Great, and this part is over to me. I also wanted to give a huge shout out to Gina. The Early Literacy Grant that we got is not an easy process to apply for, and it's not an easy process to track, maintain, monitor, see where the funding's going, make sure we're coding everything, and she does an amazing job of that, and all of the things that she is sharing would not have necessarily been possible had we not gotten that grant. So just a huge shout out to her on that work, and she has an amazing team that supports her in that. This data is nothing that is new. It was in our fancy glossy that Brooke and Beth showed earlier in the year. And I just wanted to kind of anchor us back to our strategic plan and what our goal is. And our goal is obviously supporting students in third grade to meet and exceed in reading in English or Spanish as assessed by our running records. And this is the data that we showed you just in a chart format in our glossy. Our all students, we in 22-23, we're at 1%. The following year, we were at 63%. I think we did round these to whole numbers just for simplicity. And then we have two focal groups, our Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx, and our SPED students that are receiving services for disability. Those were our other populations. So I wanted to just remind you that this is the data that we share in our strategic plan, but we also focus on data beyond third grade in our schools. We know it's part of our strategic plan, and so we wanted to share with you some really great data to kind of show how we are monitoring this as students leave us in third grade. Next one.
Okay, so for this data, we're still looking at third grade students, but we're looking at them as a cohort. Now, they're not perfect cohorts because students move in and move out. However, you can see in 2022-23, students in third grade, again, 61%. Those same students, majority of those same students in fourth grade, they are 75% for meeting and exceeding. So that hopefully goes to show that
and that's exciting. We're really excited. Woo!
Which is very different when you're looking at the previous slide when it's like, not the same groups of students. So we're seeing growth in all of our areas. So our focal group students is a 15% increase for Hispanic, Latino, and then also for our students receiving special education instruction. So that is something that when we look at our students, like today, we did a data cycle PD with our principal, and looking at some of this data, they'll take that back to their schools for their PLCs, and really looking at how are our students from year to year, how are they progressing those same students. That's a really good indicator of what's going well and what areas we need to shore up. And then for the strategic plan data, it's a combination of students in English or Spanish who meet proficiency or exceed proficiency. So what we did here is we took just all the students who took the running records in English and just looked at that data specifically. And so we're looking again at these cohorted students. So in 22-23, just in English, 60% of our students were meeting or exceeding. And that same group in fourth grade last year were at 74%. So another great gain, and we can see gains again for our two focal groups as well. So that does mimic the data that we had in the previous slide. And then for just the students taking the running record in Spanish, those are our students in our dual language schools and our students receiving Spanish literacy schools and our literacy program in our non-dual schools. So you'll see that the same cohorts of students, we had increases again, pretty great increases for all students and for our focal group, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. A little smaller increase for our students receiving special education instruction. But it's also important to note that we not only look at this data when we're reviewing how our programs are going and how our students are doing, but we also, in our dual language and Spanish literacy schools, we look at something called the zone of biliteracy. And the zone of biliteracy is a tool that shows that if a student is progressing toward biliteracy. So for example, if there's a third grader who is proficient in Spanish at third grade and at a second grade reading level in English, according to the tool, they would be in that zone of biliteracy because they are progressing, and hopefully by about sixth grade, they would be on par with each other and be proficient in both languages. Because by third or fourth grade, we don't expect to see proficiency in both languages because they're working on learning two languages. That takes time. So that's why there might be a little bit of discrepancy in the amount of students who are meeting or exceeding in Spanish at third grade.
a lot of information thrown at you all.
Yep.
And some great data. And I think, like I said, third grade is our strategic plan. And every time we will show you third grade data, that's going to be a new cohort of students every year. And I think what's important to know is, while that's important data, and we're really focused on doing a lot of things K-2 to support that data set, we don't stop. And we keep working and we keep monitoring the cohorts as we go, and we can see increases in that. And if it doesn't happen in third grade, we're going to make sure it happens in fourth. And if it's not in fourth, we're going to be striving at fifth and sixth. So again, just keeping the work going. We don't stop. And we wanted any questions. There's a lot of information.
Is there data collected at the second grade? Like if you look at the same cohort for second grade?
So, yes. So, working backwards. Yes, we do. Like, we'll have that by the end of this year to compare. So we could take this year's second graders and compare them to, them being in third grade, or, yes, working backwards. We can, yep.
Because students at the third grade also take the running records.
Yes,
Correct?
yep.
Yeah.
First grade at the end of the year, second grade through sixth grade all have running records.
I'm just thinking about, like, we're measuring at the third grade mark,
Yes.
but we want to know what happened.
Yep.
Cheered this morning when they looked at the fourth grade. They know that the story continues beyond third grade.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the data of the same cohort in the next year. I think that makes tremendous. I mean, that's a huge impact. I didn't realize when we just saw kind of the same cohort in third grade, or the different cohorts in third grade, there's such incremental changes that looking at it following the same cohort is huge. So thank you. Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
it's a great story.
Any other questions? Monique?
Yep, not a question, but I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I was interested in this, and I really appreciate the effort put forth for that and sharing those details. That looks promising.
Any other questions? Did it reps any questions? No?
How much people are improving in sports. It's really good.
I think that for the most part, I think all the numbers are I'm very impressed by all the numbers being put together and shown in such an easy way. And I think that the only negative number was a slight one, and it was the Latinx group within third grade. And that's something that I'm kind of seeing, is that a lot of this growth comes later on, like fourth. And so I'm assuming that's not a problem or concern.
Yeah, we obviously would still want the growth to happen.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
implying that, like, we're going to still see a big growth later on in that group.
Yeah.
I did have a question on the materials in the Spanish, in the third grade classroom with the students whose first language is Spanish. I was wondering what materials are being used in the classroom. I know there are several different dialects of Spanish, and I was curious if a singular dialect was being chosen and taught, or if multiple were being considered in the classroom.
I believe it is one dialect, and so like our curriculum that we adopted from our publisher is the same curriculum, but just in English and Spanish. And then we also have other materials, supplemental interventions, like a program called Estrellitas, one that's used called SimTalk, Bonitas, a couple other ones that we do have kind of equivalent to the English materials, but obviously for the Spanish language.
You have no more questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
Wanted to connect a couple of dots because I know that the board was enthusiastic about the accountability document for our strategic plan that Beth and her team made. And this morning, Gina and Becky King-Smith made a really good connection between the organizational responsibilities and the leadership responsibilities and the teacher responsibilities in making our strategic plan goals come true. And I just wanted to thank the board for focusing attention on early literacy and third grade literacy in Spanish and English. That's something that we should be proud of in HSD. That's not the same as other districts. And then that encourages our school-based leaders to focus on looking at data. And today they spent over an hour in small groups at level-alike meetings talking about the data at their schools and their focal groups, which is also special. It doesn't happen everywhere. And then we know that by extension, teachers with their goals in their classrooms with their students are talking about how to help kids read by third grade and beyond. And so that type of organizational and then leadership level and then teacher level connection is what a high-performing school district would do were we to teach all of our students how to read. And so thank you for providing that leadership and that focus tonight, allowing Gina to share. And Gina, thanks for your leadership coordinating what happened this morning and then tonight to connect all those dots for us.
Great, thank you for your presentation. Our next agenda item is school calendar. What?
She's not gonna stay?
No, we're gonna like what?
Gina's had a busy day. We're gonna let Gina go.
She's ready to go home.
Yeah. It's a long day.
School calendar committee update with Kana, who's joining us online.
Hey everyone, I am looking forward to sharing a little bit about our school calendar committee work that we've been working on. We're about halfway through our meetings that we've scheduled for this year. I'm just really excited that we have 17 folks that are participating on this committee. And just as a reminder that the goal of the committee is to create that rationale for developing calendars. We're hoping for 2 years and moving forward. And so there's been some really great opportunities for conversations. If you could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So I just want to give a shout out to folks that are serving on this committee that are elementary, middle school, and high school representatives. We have administrators, we have classified staff and union representation, student representation, and board representation as well. And it's the collective efforts of this team that we've been able to kind of determine the steps to take in terms of garnering feedback from our community. And so you can see here in this slide, we're talking about qualitative feedback through our focus groups. And we're doing that with our staff, our family and caregivers, and our community members and our students. And then on the right side is the quantitative feedback, which is the survey that we put forth for our community members, our families, and staff members. And this opportunity of the qualitative and the quantitative feedback that we've kind of started through September 13th through October 25th is allowing us to get a better picture from our community about what they are looking for in the calendar. For the questions on the focus groups, if you go to the next slide, we have put together a slideshow for the focus groups and the survey groups. And we've asked our focus groups, which is 2 to 3 members of our calendar committee, and then other folks that work in our districts, to go out to our community and share a slideshow that gives feedback on the history of the calendar, what's happening nationally, and then what's happening locally with our calendar. And then they have an opportunity to get some feedback questions that are targeted and open-ended for that qualitative feedback on the focus group side. On the side of the survey, we have a similar slideshow, one that you have seen before, that has like a breakdown of what our history of the calendar is and the national trends, and then the local trends of the calendar look back on what's happening across our metro area. And so within that feedback, we have a more look at things that are more data related. So we have a Likert scale for people to respond once they have the principals have shared with the families and the staff. And so we feel like this opportunity allows us to kind of see what people are thinking when it comes to looking at the calendar moving forward. And so when we look at the focus groups, one of the 3 questions that we asked was, when do you start thinking about the district calendar for the following school year? And we've had lots of people share that they might be thinking about it come January of the current school year. They don't start thinking about it until spring or even just before school starting. And then the second question is, are there any questions that you have in general about the calendar? And so we have some people that are just, wondering about PD days or wondering about breaks and things like that that have come up through our conversations that we've had about the calendar. And then the third question for the focus groups would a pre-Labor Day start with students be reasonable for your family, and then share reasons. And so through those focus groups, we've been able to work with 7 different groups so far that we're trying to target 10 to 15 people in each of the groups. And we've gotten some initial feedback, and we're continuing to gather feedback, particularly from our students and our community partners that we have as well. And then on the side of the calendar survey, we are looking at ways to gather information from, as I said, families and school staff and community members that have that Likert scale. And I think last week, as we're have been gathering the information, we had just over 350 people that have filled out the survey. And then as of today, we have close to 600. And so my hope is that within this next few weeks, we'll have more people filling out that information, and then we'll actually gather more information from our focus groups too, particularly students, as we move forward. If you could go ahead and go into the next slide. So I wanted to kind of share the calendar committee's work and when we're meeting. And I want to say a special thanks to Roger Will, who is our retired Hillsboro School District principal, who doesn't seem to know how to retire, but he's coming back and helping support this committee work with the team. And so he will be taking over the next meeting that we have together on the 17th to facilitate that process, and then moving forward with that. And then you see on the right side that we have a list of things, kind of dates for our school board of directors. And so when it comes to today, I'm sharing that we're collecting that feedback, and then our interim HR officers will come forward in November and kind of give an update on the focus group and survey feedback. And then in December, we'll have a proposed calendars for the school board. And then January, an opportunity to adopt the proposed calendars with the various feedback that we've received from our community members and staff and families in the process. So that's kind of just an overview of what we've been working on. I don't know if Monique wanted to add anything, because she's been a critical part of our process as well.
Nope, I think you covered it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. I'd like to open it up to any questions that anyone has at this time regarding the calendar or the timeline.
If I may ask, I was wondering how the survey was made available to the public. I'm just curious.
What we've done with that is we did a Google slideshow, and then in that was a Qualtrics survey that has a QR code that people can use their phone to put up to the Google slide and have that opportunity to give feedback. And then today at the PK-12 meeting, we've also opened it up that if people want to put it in their newsletters for staff or families, they can share it in that manner.
Thank you.
I think I heard you say also that you try to target 15 or 10 to 15 people in each focus group.
Huh?
What does that mean? Like, I'm just trying to, do you just try to focus on 10 to 15 people's answers in the focus group, or?
Yeah, So basically, each of the three, 2 to 3 members of the committee get to choose people that they want to have be a part of the focus group. And so we've talked about trying to get representation of our community. And they could choose students, they can choose families and caregivers, and they can choose staff. And so with that makeup of those different groups, we've been able to kind of gather feedback in a targeted way. And with qualitative research, and when you're doing a focus group, you want to just hear what people have to say regarding the topic. And in this case, it's the topic of the calendar and what they think about potential pre-Labor Day start and any questions that they have. And then you kind of look for the trends as people are gathering information. And what we had was someone who was a facilitator, someone who was a note taker, and then someone was a timekeeper. And so those 3 committee members then came back and they had some time to take a synopsis of what was gathered and then share that out with the rest of the committee.
Awesome. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say thank you, Connor, for this process. I think last year, some people felt like they didn't have enough time to see information, but I feel like this is beyond an extensive amount of engagement. So I appreciate the effort. I know it takes a lot of staff time and coordination, and also to the committee participants. So thank you for putting this cohort together.
Yes, thank you. And I want to say thanks to Audrea, and I know Mary Kay are sitting there, and just the time that they've been a part of the process as well. And all the other people and Monique that have been involved in the process, people are volunteering their time for these conversations. And the committee actually made a decision to add one more date because they wanted to get all of the updates put together in a synopsis form for the 7th, and then be able to kind of have a look at the calendar drafts on the 21st before it then comes to the board in December.
Oh, yes, Mark?
For how much longer is the survey open? I think you mentioned, I didn't catch it.
It's open, it was open, September 19th, and it's open till October 25th.
So that's kind of what I thought. So the 26th is after the calendar committee meets on the 17th. So on the 17th, will they be discussing sort of preliminary results that we have from it? Or will the results of the survey be waited to be shared till the November 7th meeting?
It'll be shared. Those will be shared on November 7th from the survey results. But they will again talk about the focus groups, because the focus groups are kind of working in collaboration. So we'll do some more synopsis information. And then I believe in talking with Roger Will, he wants to kind of bring forward some information about how many days do we have for each month of the calendar, and kind of looking at that. And there'll be some time for the team members of the calendar committee to kind of look, what is it like to make a calendar, and kind of be thinking through those things.
Thanks. Maybe I'm just remembering last year, but does a January adoption seem, it feels a little ambitious to me. Am I wrong about that? Like, does January seem like an ambitious adoption time?
I don't think it does, Mark. And the reason why is because I think we started early last year in the spring, in which we started the committee group. And then we came forward this early, in August to kind of continue on. So I think we've been gathering feedback in a really targeted, direct way, more so that will have us ready for when the proposal comes forward in December. And if you feel like you need more time, the beauty is that we have taken more time in the past. And if we need to do that, we can adjust it if we need to.
The survey being shared with the survey, or the slide deck with national trends, all that kind of stuff, is that what's is the one being shared in the survey the same one? Can we get a copy of that? Basically, like, I wouldn't mind seeing that. Just like I'm curious about national, local trends too. Just so maybe we just scan the QR code like everybody else, if I could find that QR code in somebody's newsletter, or could we just get a copy of that slide deck?
Yeah, I'm happy to put that in the board update and share both slideshows that are similar with the information for you to go ahead and take a look at, and then you're welcome to fill out the QR code and the survey.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Monique, for being the board representative on that committee. I know extra duties outside of this room take time, and I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Kana? No? Okay. Thank you, Kana. Our next item is a budget update with Michelle. I've been waiting.
You? I think, yeah, we are.
You all know that we've been meeting to provide details regarding our budget gap this year. And we have now actual enrollment numbers. We now have reconciled all the budgets for the 2023-2024 school year through the summer. And tonight, Michelle and I are going to tell you how we got here, what we're going to do to fix it, and then what's next. So the number is $9.5 million.
Don't bring the lead, all right.
Last year, sorry to jump right to the punchline. Last year, we made our 4% IMSS fund balance, but in order to do so again this year, in the second year of the biennium, we have to save about $9.5 million. So tonight, we'll tell you how we figured that out, what the factors are, and then we have a specific list of items that we're going to do to accomplish that savings, and then we'll talk about advocacy work moving forward for adequate funding going into the next biennium. So with that, Michelle, thank you for all your work preparing the presentation.
Thank you. Suzanne? So I try and stick with a familiar format. So you're going to recognize some of the information that I bring forward tonight. You've had access to these slides now for a couple of days. The situation page, we've brought information on 2 other occasions to you that there's a storm brewing, and we wanted to get you the current information. We're in process with bargaining, and this gap is big enough that it is going to impact the discussions that we do have at the table. Please advance. Here's the agenda. We're going to again talk about 23-24 and the end fund balance and how that impacts us today. Our budget gap. We have some mid-year balance strategies that we plan to implement and minimize the impact to the students in the schools. So we're going to talk about all of that. Go ahead, please advance. This is a reminder slide. I just like to keep it in for reference. You know, K-12 funding in the state is typically a challenge for us. It's a big focus for us. We're aware of that. We have expiration of federal support and also bond dollars. So for the last several years, we've been able to offset some of our operational maintenance, for example, with bond dollars, and then any you know, overages in the budget, we've been able to use ESSER funds to kind of fill that gap a little bit. So those are all gone for 24-25. We have an impact to revenue as enrollment declines. It's definitely flattening out, and you'll see that in our next meeting. But for the last couple of years, we were planning and budgeting on flat enrollment, and it's been down. And so the revenue kind of follows that. We have a 4% fund balance target, which means we really believe in focusing our dollars that come into the district on the staff and students in the district at that time. But that creates a challenge for us when we need contingency funds and they're not available. Other districts may have a little bit more flexibility there. Our budget is 82%. Sometimes it fluctuates. It's 82 to 84% payroll and benefits. So that's all people, all time. There's not much savings to be had in our discretionary spending, and a lot of people just go to that. Well, why don't you just turn the lights off at 8 every night and save a bunch of money? There's not as much saving in those areas. So I think that's important to bring this forward here. Our budget is built on assumptions, and I share those with the community at large during budget development process. When we built our budget for this year, it was based on the most current information we had to date.
And as we get those actual numbers in, we have to revise our budget projections as well. The other piece that is kind of lingering out there is anything that's negotiated in excess of the budget assumptions will create a deficit, and since we're already in a deficit mode, it's going to create a bigger deficit. So you'll see a strategy coming up here that we want to talk about a little bit more related to that. Yeah. So our analysis and community report, again, this is how did we get here? I know a lot of people want to really focus on that and talk about that. So our state school fund, the program itself, the structure itself has like a 3-year span of time. And what we experienced last May was a negative adjustment for the prior year enrollment and statewide reconciliation of all the other factors that all of the districts submit at the end of the year. So that's what our adjustment was based on. So it wasn't just enrollment. I've had several people ask if it's just enrollment. Couldn't you see that? Didn't you see? Why didn't you know that earlier? It wasn't just enrollment. There were other factors as well. And it's a statewide reconciliation. It's not just our information with the Department of Education. Other districts were impacted as well. But this also means that we have to adjust our assumptions for the 23-24 year because we can expect that adjustment next May. We can plan for it if we know about it in advance. We had several areas of the budget that were over, and typically we would experience a little bit of savings in some areas of the budget. These were the ones that were over, and again, it's the people, the salaries and the payroll expenses that are the biggest part of our budget. And so whenever we're over in a category such as salary or extended contract, all of those associated payroll costs are also over. They're tied together. We had a pretty good increase in substitutes, which is good news in that we were able to get substitutes in our buildings as needed. But it costs a lot more than it has in prior years. So that's an experience that we have to think about moving forward. We also had quite a spike in out-of-district tuition for students that needed additional support than we could provide in one of our classrooms. You guys have seen most of these before or heard of them before. All right? Here it is. You saw this slide as well. The current budget is not balanced. We have a $9.5 million budget gap that we're trying to solve. Moving forward, you can advance. They've seen this one. There's the math. $9.5 million sounds like an incredible amount of money. In Hillsboro, that's about 3.23%, which when your ending fund balance is 4%, that really puts you at the wire. In your home budget, you might think 3.23%. I can probably make some adjustments and get that okay, and that's what we're trying to do with some of the strategies that we're bringing you here tonight. So again, these are the guiding principles. Anytime that we're either planning an investment plan or, unfortunately in this case, a budget gap, what are those guiding stars for us? We want to minimize the impact of teachers and students, all staff. We want to reduce like restaffing in the middle of the year. That would be worst case scenario. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to have to lay off anyone. We want to keep our HSC competitive for recruitment and retention. So trying to kind of thread the needle on our bargaining process so that we can still be competitive. We're competitive today. It's a matter of planning for the future and making sure that we can sustain that without reductions as well. We need to work on some long-term system review things. So we have to kind of rethink about pre-pandemic, how we were staffed then and the systems that we had in place then and what we have today. We've added a lot of square footage. There's a note on here, and it had a lot of
grants to kind of offset some of those one-time expenses, but sometimes that creates some long-term care and feeding that we have to figure out how to navigate that in the future. Go ahead. Travis, did you want to talk about the principles at all?
Oh, those are great, thank you. And this is the level of transparency that I just wanted to have a frank conversation about how we got here so that you all can feel comfortable that you understand as leaders in our community what kind of budget shortfall we're facing and also how we got here. Because I think it has something to do with how we advocate. We did have enough to cover a 4% ending fund balance. Carryover that we might usually have in order to make sure we use the end fund balance in the second year of the biennium, which we're in right now. Districts like ours are caught short largely, as Michelle explained, due to declining enrollment, but also due to budget factors. Talked about subcosts, things that were legislated mid-biennium that weren't, the costs associated with those weren't estimated and we weren't funded for those. And then things like out-of-district placements where we have students with really acute needs who needed more from us that we did not budget for. Districts about half our size are facing a budget shortfall about half of ours. Districts twice our size have twice as much of a shortfall or more, as you've read in the newspapers. So this is not something that is a part of the story for me has been, well, how come we didn't know and why didn't we pull back sooner? And so I want to show you just this brief timeline here about last spring. And Michelle already explained this, but we talked to our administrative team this morning about how this happens. And what happens for our principals is that we get staffing sheets in March, April, May, and we know how to staff our schools. We have student-to-teacher ratios, and we're planning our schedules. And principals go into the summertime with a staffing sheet, and they know what FTE they have. We had that ready to go in April, like we always do. In fact, it was a little bit later than we often do. And then the board and budgets committee adopted a budget in early May. And it wasn't until late May of 2024 when Michelle gets the notification that, oh, here's your adjustment for the 2022-2023 school year. As Michelle explained, that feels like a long lag time for us to get that news. But it is what it is in the 3-year cycle of reconciliation that the state does. I did, because there were some questions about where did the money go, I did talk to folks who work at the state level, and there was not an allocation that was pulled back from the state of Oregon. All of that money that was allocated to schools in the 2022-2023 school year was redistributed. So we all got an adjustment in what our ADM was, and because of the shortfall of students that we experienced, that bump in ADM didn't account for the gap. So our adjustment was significant. We're required right now to make mid-year corrections, which I'll explain on the next slide. And I just want to remind folks who lived through the 2010s that this was something that is not new for us. As Michelle said, sometimes that reconciliation that happens in May will give us a little bump if our enrollment is up. In these years of declining enrollment since the pandemic, we're getting hit with a readjustment that doesn't help us. So the belt tightening that has happened in the past is happening again. It's for a little different reason, but I just want to make sure that in tonight's conversation, you all have the opportunity to ask questions about how we got here, what we're doing about it, and what next. So that's the brief storytelling that helped me understand exactly why this, especially the reconciliation hit us so hard. Next slide, please. So here's the list. Of ideas that are going to get us to solving a $9.5 million budget gap for this year. I'm just going to go through them quickly, and I'm happy to answer questions along with our team. I do want to thank the cabinet team for the weeks of work that went into creating this, which makes limited impact on student experience and on our school buildings. And we shared this with our admin team this morning. The first measure would be to reduce building-based subs. We're going to go down to 1 licensed and 1 classified sub per building. That's already happened at the beginning of this school year, and that'll save us $1 million. we keep what we call fix-it FTE back in order to solve problems like grade level in an elementary school that has more students than we predicted, we can add FTE. Each year we hold back a little bit, and we've already allocated a little bit of the 9 FTE that we set aside, but we're gonna hold on the rest, and that'll capture about $500,000. The 2024 summer programming, we had allocated $360,000, and the governor came through with a grant to help us do our summer programs without having to spend our general fund dollars on that, and so we can capture that money and help solve our budget gap. We're gonna hold building and department carryover from last year. Each department and building would have X number of dollars left over, and we allow carryover for that to buy materials and curriculum at the school level. Sometimes departments will use it to buy equipment in the following year. All that money we're going to freeze and add to solving our budget gap. We're gonna reduce department budgets at the school district office by 5%. A lot of that will be captured in reduction of things like travel for professional development that we'd like to offer our people, but in a time of budget crisis, that's one place that we can save money. We're gonna repurpose SIA dollars. We have a partnership with the city of Hillsboro to sponsor specifically our Champions programs at our Title I elementary schools. Part of our SIA allowables is to extend learning time for students, and with community feedback, we arrived at the conclusion with our community that putting after-school programming and mentorship at our Title I elementary schools is a good idea. We can use some of the money that the city has contributed to us that we weren't hoping to spend this year, but instead next year, we'll spend it this year and just have less money for those programs next year, probably resulting in more tuition paid by families accessing that programming. That'll save us $500,000. We're gonna hold positions that are non-student contact. Right now, based on people taking new jobs or retiring, whatever it is, why those positions are vacant, we're gonna choose to not fill those positions and capture $1 million. That'll come with a reduced ability for us to serve. That'll hit facilities, business office. Each of us are deciding what can go unfilled and minimize the impact on schools and the need to restaff schools at all. This will be central office focused for the most part. We'll also delay the purchase of buses. Carol has a multi-year plan to keep our investment in buses up to speed and to keep our bus fleet up and running. She says that she's ahead of schedule and is able to postpone purchases of $1.2 million in buses until next year. That'll save us $1.2 million this year, and it won't put us off our plan to keep our. This one is not set in stone because this is a process in place right now for our bargaining. In an effort to keep our forthcoming offer in bargaining to be not regressive, we're going to reshape what that offer looks like. And so whereas the current offer from our side is something like 3.5, 3, and 3.5 in 3 consecutive years, we would shape it more like 2, 4, and 4, so that the ultimate package is not less than what we had on the table before, but that the hit to the school district's budget in general salary increase specifically might be less in the first year and greater in the second and third year, so that we could save up to $4 million of our current budget and invest more in salary increases in subsequent years, year 2 and year 3 of the contract, for example. Now, we're still at the bargaining table with our union partners, HEA and HCU, and they understand the budget shortfall that we have right now. And what we're hoping to do is open a conversation about what's possible in reshaping our financial negotiations in order to account for this year's budget shortfall. Now, that said, in front of me, I have a list of other bad ideas that are not on this list. So if we're unable to accomplish that type of savings or one of these other line items, we have backup ideas that we could implement. Among those are postponing curriculum adoption, for example. It will be October 15th, the date that we would bring back financial proposals with HEA at the bargaining table. So the conversation tonight will have an impact on how that goes. We want you to be aware that that's one of our plans. I also want to acknowledge that the impact to schools here would be felt in the fact that some of our principals have carryover budgets that they were hoping to invest in great things for their schools. And that department budget reduction will have an impact on schools because travel will be limited, services may be limited if there are positions at the central office level. So this is not ideal, but again, our focus is on central office functions that can be reduced in order to save the impact on schools, specifically avoiding mid-year restaffing of schools at all. So teammates, please help me tell that story, but that's where we are as a cabinet group in our best thinking and wanted to share it transparently with you tonight. Shelby, you want to take the slide on the biennial outlook?
Sure. Please advance. So looking up and ahead, we know that the governor has already done some work about calculating current service level for K-12 in Oregon that would be based on current information instead of these kind of strange assumptions that it was very difficult for folks in districts to reconcile to. So we really have gained some ground there. As a reminder, our current biennial appropriation for K-12 is $10.2 billion. So this is a significant increase to get to 11.3. I think one of the biggest challenges that has just recently come out to that number is the 25-27 PERS rates for employers to pay. In Hillsboro, our average increase is 6.53%, which is tremendous. That's about a $22 million increase in costs from the current biennium just in PERS, just goes straight to PERS. So for us, as that's on the horizon, I know that Beth is going to share some advocacy materials, but it is going to be critical. And that PERS rate is different for every district in Oregon. All of them are different. And so that's where that collaboration as a state can be very challenging because what is enough in one community may not be enough in another community. So for us, even though I was excited to see $11.3 billion until, our preliminary CSL, and that still might move a little bit as more actual information comes in, but it's over $11.6 billion. As long as our other costs are continuing on the current trends that they're on. Again, advocacy materials will be provided to you. Beth's been working really hard to get input and clarity around what's going to be needed to talk about with our decision makers in Salem. Any questions about that? That's a whole nother session about PERS. It's very unique what has occurred in that system right now for employers. And I am hoping that PERS leadership will find a way to mitigate that increase because it was due largely to the federal funds that came and then went out of our system. And they have kind of set their projections now on this new higher level that is going to deflate. So I'm hoping there's going to be some conversations around that for some type of mitigation. As a state, I don't think we can withstand that impact.
I know PERS rates are different for everybody based on side accounts and lots of different factors. But I think the governor's initial was based on what would have been a 4.4% increase for us. Mm-hmm. 6.53 seems way higher. Even though everybody is different, seems like there's no way it's lower for anybody. Right? Like if our so even though it's different for everybody, and somebody may be 5 where they thought they were 3, or somebody may be 6 where they thought, or 12 where they thought they were 8. Based on this new number, nobody's PERS expectations went down.
No, the minimum would have been 1.5% if they didn't have any side accounts. And so for the first time ever, Hillsboro is actually higher than the school rate
which we're seeing a lot of people with side accounts being in a.
Yeah, exactly.
Worked well for us for a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, and it may come back into line.
Sure.
So this is just a very unusual circumstance with PERS. All right, next step. So ongoing, we've been back at the table. We've shared that information with our union partners. This impacts everything we talk about at the table and every employee that we have. In November and December, Brooke's going to bring forward some information about integrated guidance, which is really about getting input from the community on priorities related to the strategic plan, the student investment account, high school success, and literacy, all of the grants that are kind of bundled together under that big umbrella. In January and February, we're going to march on down the budget development road, even with the contingencies that we know are still outstanding. We still have to develop the budget, try and shift it back a little bit, but it doesn't really do any good. We've had great success in the past building a budget with contingencies kind of already baked in at various levels, but I do think that there are going to be very large contingencies. And we'll propose the budget and then adopt it and dig in July 1st. So as far as a budget outlook, I'll continue to bring updates. Travis and I will updates as more information becomes available. And Beth will be sharing information about how to advocate for the resources we need in the new biennium. That is all. Questions? I know.
Most of our budgeting process will take place before the legislature has determined what biennial allocation. I suppose before we actually adopt, we probably know what it's going to be, but it'd be close.
We didn't last time. We didn't have that final number until June 30th.
It didn't get finalized to them, but I think we kind of knew by.
I do recall that there was some kind of back and forth about who ended up winning that game, and it's like two Christmases kind of. For my perspective, to know that. I know, Mark, you had some really great questions. I don't know if you can talk about that.
Any questions? And Mark?
Okay. Sure, because I have lots. Easy stuff first, I guess. Thank you all for the questions I had over the course of the weekend and prelude to this, so I don't need to ask all of those again. You did clarify that bus purchases, for example, can be used if we pass another bond that wouldn't have to come out of general fund. So that's one way to sort of help make up some of this, is, as we discussed possibly. So that's 2027 is the 26. Transportation Department has said they're ahead. I guess the question I would have that you may not be able to answer today is, are we ahead enough that we could wait until a potential bond to purchase new buses? Like, is it, I know we're talking about delaying this bus purchase of $1.2 million for this year. Are we ahead? She's ahead on gross polluters. Do we think she's ahead enough that we could hold off on that until another bond like that?
1 year. We get 1 year stay. And so there will be an order going in 25, 26 to stay on schedule. One of the things that keeps happening is they keep kind of pushing back the deadline to have the gross polluters replaced. And so we're just kind of working that. That may be a potential in the session as well. But one other option for buses too is to lease. We used to have 4 on like rolling leases, and we did that financing. There's special rate you can get as a local government. It's not as great as just paying cash, but in a pinch we have done that in the past.
if we delayed this purchase this year, we would have to buy some more before we would pass a bond. That's general fund. Okay. Yeah, sure. That timeline, allocation being readjusted in for the 22-23 year at late May 24, right? That sort of lagging indicator. They don't ask for money back. They just, we don't have to send any money back to the state ever. It's just you get less.
Yes, that May payment
is
that much less.
Okay. They didn't ask for any money back. It's just we were expecting X amount. We got 9 million or so less.
But we got $4.5 million.
Oh, for half a year. Okay. You mentioned we had already begun limiting to one building base up to classify one building base for license already. We used future tense verbs when we were talking about this slide of potential actions. Did we do that with the assumption that we knew that we were out of balance and this was one of the measures? So that's not future tense, really. That's, we've already done that.
Yes, we've already done that. But it still counts.
Sure. No, I get it. And in the spirit of that we've been using future tense verbs on this slide, we will hold all building department carryover. Did we already do that? Are we pretty sure it's 550, or did some of that already get out the door in September?
Every year, a principal will get a projected budget memo that comes out to them in the spring. They kind of base their discretionary spending on as part of their consolidated budget workbook. And then we come back with an October memo that gives them an adjustment and would include their carryover, or if they had additional students that we didn't see in their building, then we get offered for that as well, discretionary spending. So that's our times for adjustment in the year, is we help them plan, and then as we true up for them in October, we would communicate that carryover amount.
Okay.
Which will be zero.
So
we're not taking money back.
We get all that but we are able to redirect all of that 550 because it hasn't gone out.
It hasn't gone out yet. We get them, we'll get a memo. And it hasn't gone yet.
I mean, school's already started, right? Like if I were a principal, maybe should have spent that last year or whatever, but yeah. Yeah, principals who don't have carryover probably think I should have done that. I know in a big company, that's how I would often think at the end of the year with budget. Okay. Already sort of asked the first question. So like we expect, or I would expect that the governor revises that. I think we were all, or at least I was, encouraged by the fact that the governor realized calculating current service level has been wrong for decades, at least 15 years. I do feel like it was a weird, it's 500 million, too big a round number to be right. But I would expect that we, adjustment in PERS rates, that number changes.
Well, there will be information available from PERS that pulls out school districts from the rest of the public agencies. And so that's just a lump sum. So there will be an impact number in terms of what the rates will bring into the system. And I really do hope that that's what they're looking at from this biennium to the next biennium, because that difference is significant.
Yeah, and pulling us out is interesting, but I mean, firefighters at tier 1, police officers at tier 1, it's the same situation for their departments, right?
I think the challenge for schools is that we got so much additional federal dollars that kind of blew the salary contributions that PERS assumed, 4% overall, not a general salary increase for current employees, but they assume
able to spend some of the extra dollars on people and time. They got a lot more hours than we expect.
During the 21-23, that's the evaluation period. And so that was definitely a spike, and I'm hoping that there will be enough pushback to PERS that they will consider some type of stair step or recalculation to treat that as one-time money.
And I do, so that number on slide, what is this, 7 at 3.23%. feels dangerously close to 4. I've been saying for a while, I would love to see our board find a way to get our ending fund balance back to 4.5 or 5, but also not at the cost of any people in our district. I appreciate that our previous boards had made that a lever that we had, that this board, or at least Erica and I were part of boards that, and maybe I think she and even, that changed it from 4.5 to 4. So the previous board had gone from, but
really low when we started.
yeah, and we had that lever to keep people around by lowering that ending fund balance. I don't regret doing that. And I think probably because we had extra dollars or other funds in the system, we weren't likely to default on anybody's payments or bounce any checks to staff. But at 3.23,
No.
if we hadn't had that, it does feel close. Am I wrong with that? Yeah.
I think the goal has always been to one day get to 5% to feel reassurance.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of a safety net. But I remember when we started it, back when the situation that you had just happened, and they dipped into that, we're below, and we've kind of been working at getting it to where we are now. So.
And that's part of my argument at the state level too of CSL should not be our target in a growing economy, right? So we've had to manage, let's just do the bare minimum, we can keep the lights on when we're growing the economy. And we did the same thing, right? Like if the state had been funding us in an appropriate manner of a growing economy, we probably could have gotten back to a 5% ending fund balance, dance on the head of a pin a little less. But we didn't, so.
Something else just to keep in mind, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but just in case it might be confusing to anybody else, I think it's just kind of a coincidence and maybe an anomaly that our shortfall is a number that's close to our ending fund balance, but please don't mistake, we are not filling that 3.23% gap with our ending fund balance. We are not doing that. That's why we are implementing the reductions that we're implementing. We're retaining the 4% ending fund balance. And also, I know everybody probably knows this, and it's a really maybe simple thing to say, but I say it in my head because I think it's helpful that school districts are required to have a balanced budget. We may not deficit spend. We have to have a balanced budget. So if we are experiencing expenses that we cannot cover, our only option is to cut. It's our only option. So I just think that's helpful because we can't get into a mindset of, well, we'll just do a, like scrape by this year and figure it out. Well, yeah, but we can't necessarily hold harmless forever because we have to have that balanced budget. So the changes made on slide 10 or the big list of actions we're considering, that gets us to a safe 4% ending fund balance for the 24-25 year that we're currently in. If all of those things magically came true, we would have 578,000 on top.
Okay.
But all of those are estimates at different levels, and like Travis said, we have a backup list as well.
Sure.
Building that contingency plan is big, and it will take a partnership from everyone, because even though a lot of this stuff doesn't feel student facing, it is going to impact the experience of at least staff.
And sorry.
No, I agree.
In late May of 2024, we got the adjustment for the 22-23 school year. Late May of 25, in this current budgetary year, we will get the adjustment for the 23-24 school year. How well prepared for that are we?
It's included here. It's included. Yes.
We didn't expect it in May of 2024, so how are we able to more accurately expect it this time?
Running through our budget calculation in the state school fund estimate, there's like a worksheet for that, so I can reconcile to that more readily than I was able to do for 22-23. So using the current data that I have for 23-24, I can get as close as I can for Hillsboro. If there's wide swings in other districts, I can't help that, and it may still impact us. So based on the information we have today about 23-24, these strategies should help close that gap, but we should just be very mindful and very conservative all of the rest of the year.
I guess my final-ish question, maybe some of my questions will spur others, but that if we are able to make the aspirational adjustments in the graph or in the chart, we have not reached agreements with our partners yet. If we make these adjustments, it won't be pretty, but are we able to ensure that everybody makes more and nobody has to, we can continue our current staffing? If we make these adjustments, try to say it in the nicest way I possibly can. If we make these adjustments, none of our staff will receive the raise that they probably deserve, but will they all get a raise of some kind and continue to be able to work for the district?
And this kind of the next financial offers that will be shared are, again, non-regressive. It's just a moving of the resources out of year one as much and focusing more in year 2 and 3. But there's still an increase in year 1.
And in our year 2-3 calculations for those possible agreements, like our next proposals, are we including the idea that we might be funded at a higher CSL than 11 point? We probably can't assume 11.63, which is our actual CSL. Are we assume what like?
That's what helps us figure that we need 11.62 is assuming they accept exactly what we're going to offer, which may or may not happen.
Okay.
I mean, there may be reductions needed in the second and third year.
Working hard for it.
Depending on how we get funded, and that's what our contingency plan will be that we bring forward during the budget development.
I think that's the other thing is like we're kind of having this projection that we're going to move this increase years 2 and 3, but not knowing potentially that big increases may have to have reductions in year 2 or 3.
Okay.
We're pushing it. We're minimizing the amount, like not as big as an increase, and keeping people's jobs. But then in years 2 and 3, it's a bigger jump. And yes, they're going to get an increase, but if the projections don't come out like how we hope, then we'll have to be in a reduction place.
Right. So I get if I were trying to rephrase that, like this year is known. We know where we're at, 9.5, whatever. It's known. We can make offers to our staff based on what we hope the state will fund us at. If the state doesn't, we may be looking at cuts for that, for those years.
That's true.
It's why our partnership with advocacy is so important moving forward.
Sure, that's the next agenda item.
It all very together.
Line it up like that.
Just line it like that? Yeah. Okay, we still got time for questions, but we've been meeting with our labor partners, HEA, HCU leaders on this topic of what does advocacy look like moving forward. Meeting with all of our electeds, the delegation from Hillsboro and surrounding areas. We'll have our Thursday, we get to go to W.L. Henry and talk to folks about serving our kids better. And I've been working with the Big Ten and Michelle, the Big Ten school districts in Oregon to figure out what collective advocacy looks like, and can we all agree on the same talking points? And that is the segue to what Beth's going to share with us this afternoon, is where that stands right now. And so Erica and Yvette and Mark and Beth, your work to put that together tonight that we're going to look at is much appreciated, because I think the power of unifying the state around some common talking points is the solution to what we're talking about. That is a perfect segue, Mark, to the last question that you're asking. That is the reality. It's also on general salary. So we all need to keep up with that.
Yeah, it really comes down to number of people and how much each person gets paid. Like those are that's the combination that we have to think about.
You know, we also see other districts that have gone to the bargaining table and ended up doing bigger increases, but then they cut people.
I don't think their people didn't deserve it. I think they did. But, yeah.
I know.
And Michelle, is there any other questions for Michelle regarding the budget update?
Thank you.
Okay. Conversation, everybody.
Sorry,
Thank
I'll
you.
rather.
No. Our next item is priorities with Beth.
Thank you. So I passed out a packet to everybody, and I emailed the information to Monique and Patrick so they could follow along. I have another really fun thing in my bag that I don't want you to see yet, but it's our fancy, fun thing that we have as kind of our leave behind. But we'll go through this first. I would like to start on page 3. So get past the pages with the graphs for now. And let's just kind of go through this in a stepwise process. We can come back and look at the graphs, then I can hand out the cool leave behind, and we can certainly answer questions along the way. So first, just to ground us in where we're at right now in this current biennium, 2023-25, these are the actuals that we saw for this biennium. And so we had a $10.2 billion state school fund allocation, and interestingly enough, that was put together by, obviously a majority came from the state's general fund budget, but they also utilized just over $700 million from the Student Success Act funds to create that 10.2. Now, that allocation from the Student Success Act, totally different from the student investment account, and I know it's super confusing. The state actually kind of utilizes that new income stream as both a revenue source and a required distribution as it was set up when the whole act was proposed a few years back. So we got $10.2 billion statewide for the biennium. We also received just over $1 billion statewide for the student investment account that was distributed to school districts. $325 million for Measure 98, also known as the High School Success Grant, which gives an allocation to every high school student in the state. And then new this year was the Early Literacy Grant of $90 million. So kind of an extra $1.5 billion given to schools on top of the 10.2 for a combined total impact amount of $11.702 billion. So now, as you know, since 2020-ish, there has been a Quality Education Commission whose job it is to, every 2 years, come up with the quality education model, which describes kind of the ideal schools and structure around those schools for public education in Oregon. And what they call their full implementation model, looking at the next biennium, 25-27, calls for a state school fund allocation of $13.5 billion. Now, what does that mean, full implementation model? What that means is that takes into account, so as Travis alluded to, and many of us remember all too well, of so many years where we had to make significant budget reductions across the state to deal with the recession that we were in after the housing bubble burst in 2008. Millions and millions of dollars that we had to cut and other districts across the state had to cut. So rather than calculate current service level and roll up from those years of significant cuts, the full implementation model takes a look at if those cuts had never happened and we were able to just keep funding schools, progressively more each year, even though, that's kind of maybe back on the old DAS CSL calculation that was a little bit, conservative, but that's okay. But kind of looking at what would it have been like if we had just kept progressively funding schools at a higher rate, where would we be now? That's really how you get to that $13.5 billion number. Often seen as a bit pie in the sky, however, it's the most rigorous model we have to look at, and it's very detailed in terms of like how many students at an elementary school, how many teachers, how many specialists, how many support staff, it gets very granular in looking at what these very highly educated people feel like would create a high quality education system. So it's an interesting thing to keep in mind as we kind of look at our other numbers. As was also mentioned tonight, the governor did have a work group go through and look at what changes could be made to the current service level calculation that we've been in a bit of our Oregon school business officials have been in a bit of a battle with the Department of Administrative Services for years, saying, you're not taking the right things into account when you're calculating current service level, and this is what it should be. So they've been at kind of loggerheads on that. So there was a real effort to take a look at, okay, what are some things that we could do that would get us a more accurate current service level calculation? And current service level students, that is, what would it take next year to do the exact same thing we did this year? That's what current service level means, just maintaining from one year to the next, okay? So three main things they did to look at that more accurate CSL number is actually look at a budget distribution that aligns with how we get our money from the state school fund in a 49-51 split. So that's 49% of the allocation in year one of the biennium and 51% in year two of the biennium. And that helps account for some of those year-to-year inflationary costs that everyone experiences, cost of goods and services going up, cost of utilities going up, obviously any kind of negotiated settlements with staff. That just helps not look at an artificial number if it's based on a 50-50 split. So that pumped up just over $200 million to the CSL calculation, because if you based it off 10.2, which was this biennium's number, they were thinking, okay, we'll probably start around 10.8. If we just use historical modeling, like what would CSL probably be? There's probably 10.8. But okay, so now here's the way we've just added over 200 million to that by looking at the 49-51 split. And then they did a compensation cost look back over 10 years, which is a bit of a shorter, I believe, time horizon than what they were previously using, and that was more realistic and in line with how bargains were settling across the state. So by doing that, that found another $240 million. And then looking at actual collections of local property tax revenues, generated another $55 million. So altogether, just over $500 million was uncovered through that process. So now the governor has, it's been publicized that heading in, typically the governor proposes her recommended budget in December of an even numbered year heading into a full legislative session. That's typically seen as, we always hope, it's typically the floor. It's like the starting point from where the Joint Committee on Ways and Means begins their budget discussion for the next biennium. So at least for now, until and unless potentially these PERS numbers get taken into additional consideration, we are anticipating that she would start from a point of 11.3 billion. Hopefully it would only grow from there, but at least that's a bit more accurate than it's been in the past. So, oh, sorry, did somebody say something?
Just a question. So like that, thinking about the difference, you know, the upline, SSF line that has 10.2, that's what was previous, and you're saying this year, that line would be 11.3, not including the other stuff that.
Not including the 1.5 billion, which would probably be roughly similar for next biennium. Correct. So, and so we've called that getting to accuracy. So if we look at that, that helps us get to more accuracy. Now, if we talk about adequacy, at least as it relates to what Hillsboro School District would need for adequacy, as you know, if we look at that $11.3 billion state level and consider that the Hillsboro School District, based on our size and enrollment, we get about 3.4% of every dollar allocated at the state level. So if you do that calculation on 11.3, that would mean that we would get just over $384 million for the biennium at that level. Now, with this PERS increase of over 6%, we would need that to increase, that 11.3 to increase by another 320 million to get to 11.62, as Michelle explained. Now, if we also had some additional assistance for the cost of paid leave Oregon, which we are anticipating to cost us just over $10 million in the next biennium, that would equate to another $300 million allocation at the state level. If the special education cap, which is currently at 11% of enrollment, were raised to 14% of enrollment, that would require approximately another $173 million allocation at the state level and would generate another almost $5.9 million for the Hillsboro School District, because our experience with SPED is approximately 14% of our population. So we aren't getting reimbursed for 3% of those students. And if high cost disability was reimbursed at 100% as opposed to 41%, which is the current reimbursement rate, the state would have to allocate another $94 million, which would generate just shy of $3.2 million for us. Really, if we were looking at what would it really take to cover all of our costs, and that's not even touching that we're still utilizing student investment account money to help offset our general fund. We're not going to really talk about that. That would be almost $12.2 billion right there, would be for us a more quote unquote adequate state school fund allocation. So there's that. And now what we go into next is kind of providing some of the calculations and the backup information of why we would find it necessary to get some support when it comes to things like paid leave Oregon and our special education costs. So that's what some of these calculations are. And if you look at our per student funding, also known as ADM, right? Average daily membership, regular. This number, 10,544, to a point that was being made earlier about the state redistributing and recalculating based on actual enrollment across the state. This number was changed 8 times last school year. 8 times the ADM number changed. If you go onto ODE's website, you'll see all those different district estimates. So, I mean, it doesn't change a ton, but it changes some. So you look at our ADM for a regular education student, basically $10,500. You get an additional weight for a student qualifying for special education services. You get that number again, 10.5. So a student that's up to the 11% cap, we are getting $21,000 for them, just over. I'm still going down page 3. Still going down page 3. So, like I said, our current experience with SPED students is about 14%, which is just shy of 2,600 students qualifying for SPED services. So that means we have about 500 students who are what we call above the cap, quote unquote above the cap, so between 11% and 14%. So the state does try to help districts out that are in that situation, and they take a look across the state how many students they have that are above that 11% cap, and they do give an adjustment and an allocation to districts. It's not really necessarily based on your exact number of students above the cap. It's just kind of, here's what we can do. So in HSD's case, for us most recently, we got 277.1 weights in the state school fund distribution formula for students above the cap, which is great because that got us $2.9 million, but it also meant that we had 223 students for whom we got no reimbursement. So basically that meant we had to absorb $2.3 million for those students who were not receiving that double weighting. And then if you consider the threshold for high-cost disability, which is $30,000, so keep in mind a SPED student within the 11% cap is getting $21,000, and then you have high-cost disability that kicks in at $30,000. Well, there's that gap between $21,000 and $30,000. That's another area of absorption that we do as a district for students whose care really costs a lot of money. So we had 319 students who fell into that category in the most recent year that we've been able to close out, 22-23. And so there's another $2.8 million that the district had to absorb. And I'm not saying any of this to vilify or target our students with special needs. It really is just a means of explanation for how these are really not insignificant needs that we have as a district to receive funding that we require to adequately serve these students. And then, of course, if you look at only getting 41 cents on the dollar of high-cost disability reimbursement, we are absorbing almost $3.2 million of high-cost disability that we're not getting reimbursed for there. So if you look at the entire picture, that's almost $8.4 million in special education-related costs that the district is absorbing. And that number is pretty, I mean, that's a pretty accurate representation. That's not like, oh, it really spiked this year. Like, no, that's kind of, it's just been kind of like steadily chugging along, increasing every year. So that's an important thing to know. Yeah.
So on the previous page, those final 2 bullet points in the needs add up to 9.01, not 8.3. So is that an expectation of our growing costs in 23, 25, 27? So if you look at SPED cap 14% is 5.88.
Yeah.
Disability 3.19. Those add up to 9.01, not 8.3.
Yeah, and I think
this is what we spent last year, and that's
this is what
will be more in 25, 27.
This is just illustrative of any year. Like this is best analysis of like a current year.
Okay.
So and this has been ongoing.
Sure.
She's for illustrative and for advocacy purposes. She's bringing it forward to say these are some spaces where it's not a carve out from the state school fund and it's an additional allocation. There's opportunity to change the distribution that would really help us.
And the state clearly recognizes that providing accommodations for SPED students costs more than a student without SPED accommodations. So they clearly understand that because they provide additional funding.
Yeah.
But they're getting roughly 8.3 million shy of that for our district specifically. I'm sure other districts have different numbers, but I would bet most of them are spending general fund dollars to cover those gaps. But
yeah.
They, while recognizing that it costs more to provide SPED accommodations, they're not providing an adequate amount to anybody, probably.
Yeah. And these numbers are projections for the next biennium, so they definitely would be larger because they are taking into account moving into the future when you're going back and looking at, yeah.
So it doesn't require a paradigm shift in thinking. Like,
Right.
they don't have to go, oh, well, that students cost more. No, they already recognize that. It doesn't require a paradigm shift in philosophy. It's just understanding that, oh, we're coming up short. A thing we already expect and understand. We're not providing an adequate coverage for that number.
All right, so moving on, and now we're getting into.
All right, one other question.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
8 point, so we often use, school board members have two knobs they can turn when it comes to budget, days of school and class size. So we've been saying for a year now that our lower class size by one is roughly 2.2 million. How do we have an idea, like how many humans would that, how many extra teachers would lowering class size by one for $2.2 million get? How many more teachers would that be?
As many as you think. Like
I think it's like 20.
18 to 20? Yeah.
I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 2.7.
Oh, all right, I'm behind. And it was $950 for a day of school, and it's probably more than that now too, right?
It's over 1 million for a day.
So it's over 1 million for 1 day of school, and it's probably 2.7 as by one, which would get us about 20 more teachers, 22 teachers.
And that's another thing that is called out in the quality education model. However, they don't account for it in their $13.5 billion recommendation, is that they would like to see the state develop a plan, perhaps a stair-stepped plan for getting to a 180-day school year, which is kind of considered to be an ideal. We're at 173. There are other districts that fall between 173 and 180, and my guess is there's probably other states where potentially it's maybe a day or two more than 180, but I think 180 is kind of seen as a nice target to aim for, and they do call that out in the current report. We don't call it out in our priorities because I just don't know that we're ready to go there, and we're already kind of saying honestly, just to make us whole, we're going to need more than we're talking about. So I think we're focusing a little bit more on the here and now and really shoring up what we've got.
But just in expenditures, absorbed costs for special education that the state understands costs more but isn't providing enough, at 8.3 on top of page 4, divide that by 2.7, that's 3. So if we were actually made whole for what it actually costs to provide accommodations for SPED students, we're talking about 66 more teachers available in our district.
That would.
Want to do basic
math.
I mean.
Back of the napkin, yep.
Right, like, so it's not a falsehood to say, if we didn't have to absorb the extra cost of special education for our students, which we're happy to do because they require those accommodations, we could likely have 60 plus more teachers in our district.
Well, but I have a follow-up question to some of Mark's questions around because I would imagine that the bullet points under the getting to adequacy is really the areas of advocacy that we would be focusing on. With the SPED cap and high cost of disability at 100% reimbursement, which right now it's only at 41%. I mean, how likely is that the state would be receptive to a 100% reimbursement? Like, is that just completely out of the question, or is that something that?
I think our challenges there would be, I think they would probably want to do either or, not both, is one thing. Like, we'll either raise the cap or we'll do, I think that's part of the conversation, at least that I've heard. Mm-hmm. And then the challenge would be getting them to actually fund it with, like, not reducing something else to give us that, because that wouldn't really help overall. Right. If they're reducing state school funds to bump up the reimbursement, it just, it doesn't help overall.
but then they get to say, we're funding it at 100.
Yeah. So the important thing is, you know, yeah, just don't gouge the state school fund and treat that as though you're increasing our allocations, because it's kind of really not.
And the other thing that I would add to that is that in this conversation about clarity, the few advocacy points is to the 11% cap and the reimbursement for high cost disability. Everyone's gelling around these. And so what I think part of the challenge for us as leaders in the state is to not scoop up everything that we'd like to see accounted for. So what I appreciate about this document is that it gives us real numbers for Hillsboro. I know secretly Salem Kaiser, Portland Public Beach, gathering this number also. And so when we come to our legislators and we ask, we'll have a very specific ask and I'll have a dollar figure attached. That gives me a little more hope than just the scooping up of all good ideas and shouting simultaneously at the process started earlier this time. And I hope we create clarity for our legislators around this topic.
And the other thing is that we have a lot of new legislators, so like giving specific concrete examples of how come you're not receiving enough money, or where, like that's a clear area that we can show, and it's easy to understand. Because the thing is like really the complexity, the learning stuff. Okay, and they're just starting, and they're in this long session, so.
And then
State, sorry, we're on top of the state session, so we're talking about state advocacy, but as we talked about in budget presentations in the past, if the federal government funded IEA at its appropriate level, all of our budget problems would go away, right? So that's federal advocacy is different, but I think we've talked about this before. The federal government underfunds IDEA by a substantial amount, and if that were a thing that the federal government did, would actually fund IDEA at the level required, this would be a completely different conversation.
And Michelle, oh, sorry.
Wrong or no?
Absolutely correct. Our IDA grant is about, you know, in this context, is about $4 million a year. It's about 10 cents on the dollar to what our general fund contributes to advocacy.
NSBA advocacy.
Yeah.
And is the SPED and the high cost disability, is that accounted for in the over expenditure for like the out of pocket or out of district? Is some of that number?
Yeah, we do track those students that we're sending out.
Yeah.
Any student over $30,000. And that's one of the challenges too across the state in terms of collecting the high cost disability grant dollars is our accounting structure doesn't track expenditures to the student level. So it's really tracking what's happening at the service level for the students and then calculating what those costs are. So that one is particularly challenging for districts to access as well. And it's a finite amount of money. It's a grant. I want to say it's $55 million carve out of the state school fund. The idea that would reimburse everyone at 100%, but people have really gone after those grant dollars because they have qualifying students. So they have history over time that shows the demand for those funds is much greater than their ability to fund with that level.
All right, let's go through a couple of the other legislative advocacy points that we've got in here. We do have one for allocating funding for summer programming, which we kind of bucket under investment requests. And we were very grateful that Governor Kotek allocated $30 million for the summer of 2024. HSC was fortunate enough to be one of those grant recipients for that money, and it was super helpful. Our highest need as we continue is probably for the high school credit attainment programs that we run at our high schools, but we also were able to do enrichment and jumpstart programs that are very beneficial to students as well, and so would love to see those continue in the future. So we do have
an advocacy point around summer programming. Another one is avoid creating new restricted grant programs. So this is one that we're mirroring that was on Salem Kaiser's list of priorities that I think was a pretty good one. And it highlights that in this biennium alone, there were 38 restricted categorical grants for districts. And when you divide up our available sources of funding like that, it becomes an administrative burden, and it kind of unnecessarily hamstrings your ability to braid funding and get creative. And, you know, the more siloed and restrictive you have sources of money, the less you can do with them. And it does kind of undercut our core programming in the district. So we would like to advocate for possibly a collapsing of some of those into larger buckets, and where it makes sense, perhaps just folding them back into the state school fund. All right, and then one of our other historical favorites, unfunded mandates, unfunded and or underfunded mandates. And we have a handful of examples here. We start off with Paid Leave Oregon, which was not anything that was aimed at school districts. However, like other employers across the state, it is something that we have to comply with. However, unlike other, at least many other employers across the state, when we have people out, for the most part, you can't just let those positions go unfilled, because you're talking about students, you're talking classrooms. You have to have somebody in the classroom with those students. So the burden on school districts is perhaps greater, because we have substitute costs on top of the costs associated with the staff member who's on leave. And the way they've reworked it, it's kind of this reworking of OFLA, the Oregon Family Leave Act, that allows like concurrent payments. So like accessing your pay for being on sick leave and being on Paid Leave Oregon, and your eligibility is you can do 12 weeks every 12 months. And it's just the expansion is very generous for staff, and for those who need it, it's a great benefit, but it is, you know, it's difficult for us to manage. We had 247 staff members take advantage of Paid Leave Oregon in last school year, and you see the numbers here. That was 10,466 days of leave that were accessed under Paid Leave Oregon, and you can see the costs associated here. Now, I do want to do a little caveat. This could be considered like a gross cost, not necessarily a net cost, because before Paid Leave Oregon, I mean, we would have still had some subset of those staff members possibly going on OFLA, FEMLA. So I know that Michelle wants to kind of dig in once she's got some time, if she can ever find any time, to actually dig in and kind of tease out, you know, what was the actual impact of Paid Leave Oregon over and above what our normal experience level with OFLA would have been in the normal year, right? So granted, keep in mind, this is not just like out of the blue, we've never experienced this cost level before, but it certainly is higher than what we've experienced in the past.
That's not a net, like we can't say.
This isn't a net. Yeah, we can't say that it's a net, but it's a gross. Is that? Yeah, getting the thumbs up there. But it's very costly, and like I said, Michelle has estimated that this will cost us over $10 million in the next biennium for Paid Leave Oregon.
I have a question on this.
Yeah.
Because you said the paid benefits is that gross amount, but what about you said we had an increase also like in is that because of this absenteeism cost of subsidies?
I think Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the number quoted here for increased license and classified substitute costs was those directly as a result of people going on Paid Leave Oregon. So not district-wide subs and sub costs and their pay level or anything like that. This is just the people we had to bring in to cover for these people who are out on Paid Leave Oregon, $2.7 million. All right, another example is House Bill 2531. Again, not directed at school districts, however, it does impact us.
just one of those kind of unintended consequences, possibly. Prohibiting the manufacture and sale of compact fluorescent and linear fluorescent lamps, like these. And so for any building that didn't have lighting as part of its bond work from 2017, if you take those out of the mix, 75% of what remains in the district is that kind of lighting. And so, you know, in some cases, we're able to just do a one-for-one switch out, you know, the fluorescent tubes with the tubular LEDs. I get kind of confused in here. But in other instances, you know, if you have to change out the fixtures and all the other things, I mean, it's very costly. And the lowest cost, like there's Maya over in facilities has a spreadsheet that's got like 4 different columns of potential costs. This is the lowest one, and it's drawing it out over time, and it's having our own people do it, and it's over $5 million just to deal with the lighting. And that actually ranges to almost $10 million. And not that that has to happen in a single year. It's just, again, it's illustrative of the fact that sometimes when these bills get passed, they might sound noble and like a great idea, but there are some unintended consequences. And for like public school districts and other organizations that really don't have the capacity to earn their own money or charge different amounts for their products, or, you know, decide to give more or less money to shareholders, like we can't make those types of decisions. We have set funding. And so we just have to make do with what we get. So it becomes difficult when our costs increase like that and we're not necessarily expecting
to be a bond dollar expenditure.
The lighting, yes, that could. Something that we will know soon, we don't quite know yet, was a change, again, in unemployment insurance benefits. Something not necessarily directed at us, but does impact us in terms of 10-month employees being able to apply for unemployment during those 2 months that they're not employed. And so we do know that we had some experience with that. We had some staff members that utilized spring break as their waiting period of 7 days and then access that in the summer. We'll have more information on that in the coming weeks. And then another example is Senate Bill 819, abbreviated day instruction. That was something that was a big, got a lot of press in the last full legislative session. We're estimating our costs for that implementation at over $400,000. And interestingly enough, a bulk of that, $300,000, was money that ODE reduced our IDEA grant by because they had to hire extra staff just to help implement it because it, you know, of its complication. We had to hire another half-time data tech, and it doesn't even take into account the additional out-of-district placement needs that it generated for us. Personal finance, half credit for graduation, is another example that we have in here. We're estimating our costs for that to be about $850,000, $600,000 for staffing and scheduling impacts, and then if we do have to purchase the new curriculum, about $250,000 for that. Right now, we offer it as an elective, I believe, but if it's a required class for all students, then these are the costs that we're estimating for that. The last thing we have on here is a little bit more of a concept, and if the board doesn't love it, we can drop it. But if you kind of want to turn to page 2 of the packet and look at the funding graph that looks at the last 20-ish years of K-12 education funding, and you look at how our percentage has been on the decline, you would also, if this were one of my other graphs, if you go to our budget reference graph, then you can see how other areas of the budget have increased. Health and Human Services is one of those areas. And we have, you know, some areas of significant crossover with Health and Human Services. We have students that have a lot of mental health needs, And it would be great if we could reduce administrative barriers between Oregon Health Authority and Oregon Department of Ed to allow maybe some OHM mental health therapists to come and serve students in schools. And that helps with their new strategic initiative that they announced, that they want to reduce health disparities across the state by 2030. So maybe, you know, something could be done at the legislative level to help make that a reality. And things like taking a look at how to make it easier for districts to bill for Medicaid reimbursement. That would be super helpful to us because we've gotten fully invested in that process. But it is difficult, and if there were some administrative burden reduction, that would certainly help us. So now I'm super excited to show you, to reveal to you a really fun thing that I made, and I hope you like it. And if you don't, you should tell me that you do, because then I'll be sad. Recipe cards. Sure. It's a way to take this, which could make your eyes glaze over, and share a bunch of information in a kind of a cute way that allows you to just take in little snippets of information, a page at a time. And I got cutesy with it, and I said, recipe for an effective legislative session. And then the next one is the menu, stable, accurate, and adequate funding for K-12 education, and our other main advocacy points. And then as you flip through the cards, they are related by color. So, like, so I might have missed one. I had Bryson print these for me. I should have had 2 greens, but I'm missing page 3 for some reason. Page 3 was that whole calculation of the SPED funding. So that's sad, but that's okay. We have time because we're not meeting with our legislators till Thursday, so I can reprint it. But so yeah, green obviously for the money stuff. So that has those points, the page that's missing, that actually our friends on screen can see because they have the PDF, which I can share with you too, but would have all those SPED calculations. And then,
Yeah, even
all the evens?
6 and 8 are wrong.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Well, at least it's numbered. See, I like the concept. Yeah, so great.
Yeah.
Cool, right?
This is just for having lunch. I mean, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, talking points.
Yeah, so you should hand them all back since they're obviously incomplete, and then I will have them reprinted and checked for accuracy and completeness. But I have a laminator. We can laminate them also. And craft.
She literally asked me if I wanted a laminator today. I'm like, I don't think so. What do I know? Okay.
Yeah. It's so fun. I like look for things. Laminate everything.
Just a second.
Pardon me? Like, what can I like?
The second copy, could you please put second edition on it for a bit of an extra flair?
Second edition?
Yes. Updated and revised.
No.
I'm bringing this
the
back
wrong
to you.
ones will be a collector's edition.
You're the discontinued person.
Wow.
Sell it online.
Oh, God. So funny.
That's good, Ron. Thank you for making all this information digestible for people like me.
Oh, thank you.
And it is crazy super dense.
Yeah.
At least 6 years on the school board to even get to where I am now. And I'm at 7, so I spent a year not knowing anything.
They're scary.
So how do we feel about these messages?
I like all of them.
Yes, I like it. I think I agree with some other folks that the fundamental principles of the way we've been funding education for the last 3 decades or so under Measure 5 and 50 are not providing the outcomes that Oregonians want to observe. I also think that message is interesting, but it's not problem that can be solved in one legislative session. So while I think that we should be looking at changing the fundamental way that education is funded, it's not a thing that's going to happen in the 2025 legislative session. We've already got a budget deficit for this year. I'd like to keep as many people around and pay them a lot more in subsequent years. So I think our advocacy should be based around getting more funding into the system we have. And this is a pretty decent way to do that. But, you know, ultimately, I think I would hope our legislators stop thinking of CSL as our target. Like should not be our target.
Patrick or Monique online, do you have any questions or comments?
Not nearly as good, though.
It was great information. Thank you, Beth. I was following along closely and taking notes. So I think both your and Michelle's presentation earlier put together give us a great picture of where we're going and what we need to focus on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo those comments. I think they were both fantastic presentations. Lots of information to think about, and thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you. I think this lights a fire under my butt, at least. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's so, I guess, I was whispering to Michelle, like, when she was sharing the budget presentation, like, this is so grim, almost, you know, just looking at how state school funding has been over the last several decades. But I think this lights a fire it should light a fire under our butts, and I really do like all of these priorities, and I think you mentioned earlier the most important thing really is that any of these things that we're asking for shouldn't result in a decrease in the state school fund elsewhere in order to fund these things, but it really needs to be this and so how we message that and how we advocate for that, I think, will be really important. But I also agree with Mark's statement that it's not going to be a quick fix or a fix that is going to happen in the short term. And so even to add on to that of what is our contingency plan going to be, whether it's going out for a bond or going out for a levy, I think that those are things that we should continue discussion around as a board, local level.
And I agree. It feels a little grim, but I do feel a little hope. If you've been around here for a little while, 2003 was coming. So we've been through grim before and we've done all right. But I feel like at least this time there's a little sprinkle of hope. I agree with you.
Yeah. I think the conversation's been elevated to a point where people are really paying attention. So I have hope for the session.
I think it's especially hopeful that Oregon has more money in it than it's ever had. So this, in that sense, this is an excellent time to make movement.
Thank you. I think you're still up next, right, Beth?
Okay. Yes. So American Education Week happens the week of November 16th. And I wanted to just check in with board members to see what you would like to do to commemorate that. For the last several years, what we've done is order in fresh apples. We have our Nutrition Services Department order in fresh apples. And then we, based on the staffing at each of our schools and district buildings, we put together baskets and crates of apples and take them over to the schools, along with thank you notes that have been signed by all of the board members. We can certainly do that again. In pandemic years, we did fruit leather because we didn't know when people would be back in the building and it needed to last. Previous to the apples, I know there used to be like baskets of candy instead, but I think we switched to the apples because of its symbolism for schools and being a little bit healthier. So, but, you know, totally open if anybody has a creative new idea or desire of something that you'd like to do. But if you'd like to do the apples, we're happy to coordinate that again this year.
Other ideas of what they've done in other districts?
What's that?
Any ideas of other districts? Like, what do they do?
No, I don't know.
I was just always wondered, like, was
Or
there
even feedback from
like what
teachers and staff, what they've appreciated, or what they appreciate, or what they've appreciated, aside from a raise. I know.
Yeah. Would it be okay to ask you a question?
Mary Kay.
We happen to have a teacher here. Like, I've heard everything from, oh, the apple stain is lame to, oh, it's totally awesome to fine. Is it pretty individualized like that? Like, there's no way to tell how people are going to react? Or do people think, is it pretty is it definitive that it's lame, or is it definitive that it's awesome?
People appreciate the thought, and I know there's two schools, the school of PCR and the school of CLD. It's a really nice.
Maybe it's a basket of apples and king-size candy bars.
Underneath, you got to go through the apples to get to them?
Yeah. Take an apple to take a...
Yes.
With that. I'm trying to think, and also our financial savings time, but it's always good. Oh, yeah, caramel apple.
Yeah. The apple. What are we saying?
You're saying like some of the caramel apple chocolate, like it has an apple.
Oh.
Candy is given out. You could always say it's a prelude to the deluge of candy for Halloween. You can say this is our early Halloween gift to you.
Except it'll be
After Halloween.
Yeah, after Halloween.
It's our leftover Halloween.
Oh, that's terrible. Oh. That message.
No.
Yeah, it's hard to, obviously, we just came off of presentations talking about a budget deficit, so it's probably not a great year to do a lot of additive things, but, you know, certainly something to let them know that you appreciate them and you care about them is a nice thing to do.
I love driving around to the schools, dropping something.
Yeah.
If it's apples, great. If I would like to continue to do that.
Have that option, yeah.
Be able to at least have board members who have the time and ability to bring stuff. I know staff members do it too, so I appreciate everybody helping. But I love going into the school one day with something and saying, hey.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I agree. Have a couple board meetings. Think about it.
What's that?
Ideas.
Oh, sure.
ChatGPT and Google have suggestions on it.
Yeah. We can finalize it at our next board meeting if you like. That still gives us time to order the apples if that's what we ultimately decide to do.
Great. Thank you. And then that brings us to discussion time. We'll start with the student reps. Gwen, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Just as a student, really, to see at these board meetings.
So good. Legislation, just the past, I don't even know, it's really, really interesting just to see how the funding impacts everybody at HSC. And I guess I just wanted to share an experience kind of that I had last week. Last week was like homecoming for Century. It was so nice because this year, and student government really made, was able to like capitalize off of that. So I just think going off of the last couple of weeks and schools ramping up, I feel like it's kind of a little bit more obvious this year, seeing everything that's happening, and that really made me happy.
First of all, really loved today's meeting. It was nice to have so that Kristen Miles chime in. Then it really made me think on how the board is meant to help the superintendent with their position, and it really reminded me that superintendent sort of has a bunch of teachers, so to speak, who's helping them with their tasks. One other thing. Yes. One of the things we talked about in government today, in AP government, was how the education is one of the things that the federal level funds less. State government has more than federal, and I'm like, yes, that's right. Forgot it. Realized how many unfunded mandates there were for our.
I'd like to thank you all for the really good amount of data and information and just genuine clearness of all this, because I am not a data scientist, but I can appreciate all the hard work put into it. And it helps me think more on just a scale of a whole district and a people, more than just who I am or who my best friends in my inner circle is. And I really look forward to being able to support people more and more, the more that I get to learn about it from these board meetings.
Yeah. Travis?
Those are really thoughtful comments.
Yeah, I know. Good job, student.
I was going to comment on homecoming too. There's two more. The Hill Highs is on Thursday, and there's a big parade. I hear if you go to Bagley Park, you can catch the parade with the best seats. I wanted to thank HSF for putting together a fun run, and Aaron Carlson gave Mark Watson, Beth Grazer, and Kimberly Parrott from Pointer Middle School shout outs for being supportive of the last minute push to get people to the fun run and help raise money for HSF. So thank you to HSF folks. I already gave a shout out to Gina. I didn't give a shout out to Brooke, who's responsible for the data systems that go behind our strategic plan and our literacy goals and all that. So Brooke and some data scientists around here have come up with data systems that are useful to teachers and principals and organizational leaders that are unprecedented, and folks around for your leadership there. Mark and Erica, thank you for getting the legislative advocacy thing. Those are afternoon meetings where we all are putting heads together to figure out how to create our legislative. So, thank you for a good meeting tonight.
Thank you. Board members online. Monique?
Just again, thank you for the presentations and the information. There's certainly a lot to consider with the budget the way it is, and our legislative advocacy happening for 2025. That's all I have for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick?
Thanks for everything tonight. Good to see everyone virtually. I'll just briefly mention, since we're in the world of learning and celebrating knowledge, that this week is one of my favorite weeks of the year. It's the weeks the Nobel Prizes are awarded. So each day this week, a different Nobel Prize is awarded by the Swedish Academy. And medicine was yesterday, and physics was today, and I'm looking forward to biology and chemistry. So if any science educators are watching, it's really fun to share with your students that they can look up on the website. You know, they go into great detail and do nice YouTube videos on what sort of research they're recognizing, and it's really inspirational about all that humanity is doing to better the world around us. So that's a great thing for educators to be excited about.
Thank you. Erica?
Maybe a suggestion that there's not candy when we're having discussions about budget and advocacy. I stress eat. I'm like, hard. Anywho, just a side comment. I think that this is, like, Sheehan, you mentioned, like, this really kind of lights a fire under us to do the advocacy work. I also think that as we are also in a really good position that we have our strategic plan, because when we're asking for all this, well, what did you do with the money? And I think for us, having really guided, like, vision of, like, here's where we're headed, and it trickles down our organization, down to the classroom teacher, like, these are our targets that we're trying to hit, and I really like that we have that. Starting from when I started on the board until now, I feel like we're in the best, like, position to do advocacy. I love even our little 2-pager that we had that goes along with, like, so we're asking for this money, this is, you know, how we're investing it in our district, here's how we're targeting also specific groups or areas. So I appreciate all of that. I'm looking forward to W. Henry on Thursday, so I'll be joining you for that, and the Legislative Roadshow also later this month as well, where we get together with other school board members from county. And I would have cards just to show off how we're preparing ourselves for advocacy. I think that would be really cool for us to share. So, yeah, thank you for everybody for always doing your best.
Thank you. Sheehan?
And I'm happy to laminate those recipe cards, so let us know if you need to borrow that laminator. So really, really appreciate all of the presentations today. I love the spirit of transparency and just being equipped with some of the data behind, really, as we head into legislative session, putting numbers and kind of pointing to some concrete data, I think will be helpful. So really appreciate that. Yeah, it's always great being in person. So just love seeing you all. That's all.
Thank you.
I too am looking forward to our school visit this week. Rose, afterwards, let me figure out who hasn't RSVP'd yet, and maybe we can do some personal reaching out, make sure about that. When we last met with the advocacy group, the recipe cards were just a concept, so it's great to see it in action. It's fantastic. Nice job on that. Great job with all of the presentations today, and yeah, it's not great news. I do think there's hope, and it's not as bad as things we've weathered before, I suppose. Did have an opportunity to participate in well, for me, it was a fun walk. Probably ran, but walk 5K. You don't have to run 5K, so I didn't participate. But it was great to be, amongst so many people excited about HSF. Again, great organization. Glad that we have them in our district. So it was fun to be out there, and it was a beautiful day. So everything was great. I feel like I had one other thing. The Legislative Roadshow. Do the students know about that? Like, we've given you that date as well? Okay, so that's a opportunity for you to participate outside of this room. No pressure to do so. Got a lot on your plates, but yeah, if you'd like to join us at the Northwest Regional ESD, these directions. That way?
Oh, that way.
Very close to here.
Just kidding, we're facing that way.
Yeah, very close to here, so it's not too far. And yes, again, extending an invitation for you to join OSBA convention in November. So always looking forward to participating from our students. And yeah, great, thoughtful comments tonight. We're just like at the beginning of the academic year. Imagine doing, hey, so at the beginning of your service, you guys are crushing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I wanted to say thank you to the cabinet team for all the work that you do. Michelle, thank you for that budget presentation. It's very, it explained to me a lot. I was able to understand a lot of our budget and where we're at. That's really important for me to know and for all of us. And Beth, this has been a great journey for me just because it's so well detailed, especially with me coming in new, and trying to understand all of this was complex, but with this, the way you've explained it to me makes a lot of sense, and those cards is the best idea. Well, probably to have great ideas. All right? In that way. But a great way to, it's just a lot simpler for me to understand, and when I'm having conversations with our legislators, it makes it easy. So I'm very appreciative of that. And with that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you.